Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. If you have problems with the IRS, don't focus on the negative, focus on the solutions. With the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish. For over 15 years, he's been helping taxpayers with IRS problems reclaim their lives and their financial stability. Now, here's your host of the IRS Solution Attorney Show, Darrin T. Mish.
Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish.
I promise he is. I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. He sounds a little off today because he is. He's not feeling well.
What? That was a college try, though. That wasn't really all that bad.
It wasn't bad, but you can totally hear it in your voice.
Sounds perfect to me.
Okay. Well, Pat George is spraying the studio down with Lysol, and I'm in here hanging next to Darrin, but he's going to make it.
There's literally people spraying Lysol up and down the hallway. And we're here in a big radio station, really. There's multiple stations and lots of studios.
Well, there's somebody outside the door right now painting a big red cross on the door.
So, but you can call in today because we have a great show lined up.
Yeah, there's fumigation going on. But the reason I'm really sitting here live is because we have a great guest today. His name is John Sapp, and he's from the website of 1040.com. Why don't we get him on the line there?
He's on. Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. How are y'all doing?
Great.
We're doing really good. Seriously, the only reason I'm sitting here in the studio live is because I had committed to you that we were going to be on the show today, and I'm really interested and excited to talk to you about the thing that you're here to talk about, which is filing your taxes and ID theft, security and refund delays. We talk about the ID theft problems quite a bit here on the show, but it's really neat to have an expert such as yourself come on and discuss this information with us.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how much of an expert I am on the technology side, but we definitely are very involved in a lot of the IRS's efforts to combat ID theft and refund fraud.
Let me read your bio real quick, just so people know why they should listen to you. I think it's very impressive. John has served in a key role at Drake Software since 1995. Drake Software is really one of the very biggest tax preparation software companies in the country. He's had roles ranging from chief financial officer to vice president of Drake's sales, marketing, and education divisions. Today, he serves as the vice president of strategic development, where his role is to help shape the future and the growth of one of the largest professional tax software companies in the nation. As a CPA, he has considerable experience working in public accounting, in technology, and
he's got a whole lot of experience
in private industries. Right? He holds a bachelor's degree in accounting from Oral Roberts University. And he has been a certified public accountant since 1987.
John,
wow.
I would say that makes you more than qualified to be our guest this morning on the show.
Most certainly.
Yeah, I had different hair color when that bio was written, probably.
Yeah, I can relate.
Happens to the best of us, unfortunately.
I have a video that plays in my lobby when you come in to come as a prospect, as a potential client. And that video is at least 10 years old.
Oh, I know. Your hair color's different.
Back then, my spiel was, I'm this young, go-getting, energetic guy, and now I'm got a gray beard and all that stuff. So
there's a pro and con to that, right? So the energy level might have dropped, but the experience level went up.
I don't need as much experience as I used to need, or as much energy as I used to need.
So, John, I'm so glad that Darrin brought this topic up, because in my line of work on the real estate side, we see this too. And so, for example, I had a client that applied for a loan and, she got ready to do it. Everything was in, everything was perfect. Well, now in the state of Florida, we're a high fraud and high risk state. So they make you sign what's called the 4506T to pull your tax transcript. And they want to verify what you gave the lender is the same as you filed with the IRS. Well, she found out that someone had actually filed a tax return for her and taken the tax refund in California. And it was just a mess to unwind, from what I understand.
Well, and we're seeing that over the last 3 years especially. Our tax system is built with refunds in mind, right, regardless of what financial planners tell us, which is to try to get our tax event as close to zero as possible, right, so the IRS doesn't keep our money all year. But, the majority of people will get a tax refund, and a lot of those are refundable credits, such as the child tax credit and earned income credit, which means that they're not necessarily based on withholding from a W-2. And so it makes it a high priority target for a lot of nefarious criminals out there. And the IRS will tell us that, it's evolved over the last a couple of years. As you shut one door when you're dealing with security, they try to come in the window or they try to sneak in a different way. So we've seen a lot of the folks that.
Can you talk about that, John, for a minute? When you say sneak in the way, like how can someone avoid this? Because I know if I was listening to the show right now, I'd be thinking, how are these people subject to the tax fraud, identity theft to begin with, and how can someone avoid that?
Well, there's a couple of things folks can do. The first thing really is just to be aware. You would think it was common sense things, but especially a lot of millennials, I think, don't necessarily, it's not really on their radar. They're just getting out of college or whatever, and maybe at college they had to have their Social Security card for a lot of different stuff, so they carry it around with them. Don't do that. Don't give your Social Security number to folks. Don't, when you use Wi-Fi, a lot of folks will put a lot of, well, let me put it this way. What we're seeing a lot of is organized crime, excuse me, that is very sophisticated in what they can do with identity theft. So what they'll do is they'll take, if you think about security questions that your bank site might ask you, well, the tax software may ask you now, they call those out-of-wallet questions, things that you would have to pull your wallet out to actually know, like, which of these addresses have you lived at in the last 2 or 3 years. Because organized crime is so good at reading what you post on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram, all that personal information that people put on the internet, they have computer programs that go out and match those up with information that they can buy on the dark web about you, your name, your Social Security number, and those types of things. And then they're able to answer those out-of-wallet questions a lot of times better than the taxpayer.
So they buy this list from some place, and so the person that I'm thinking of with that story that I shared, she works at a hospital in the area, and they think that, themselves and a lot of the employees, that their information was compromised. So you're saying that someone likely would have maybe hacked into that system, downloaded the information, sold it on the black market?
Exactly.
Wow. And that could happen anywhere.
It can happen anywhere. We saw the Department of Defense was hacked, and when they were hacked, that wasn't just names and Social Security numbers. That was fingerprints, security clearances, all those types of things. The advantage folks in Florida have is if they believe they can voluntarily, even without an ID theft event, go ahead and get what's called an IP PIN, identity protection PIN. They can go online at the IRS website and get one of those. And their tax return cannot be filed or accepted by the IRS without that number.
Wow, that's really interesting. I did not know that.
That's what she ended up doing. And she actually put a lock on her bank account and everything. You can't even make a deposit without giving like a PIN or a password or something.
I'll tell you what, though, in handling tax problems like we do in the office, one of the things that we do is we pull the transcripts for the taxpayer because that kind of tells me the historical record of what's gone on, if there's missing returns or if there's, how much they owe and that kind of thing, if there's opportunities to abate penalties. And when that ID theft hold is on the account, it makes it a whole lot harder to get. There is a system to get it, but it's harder. Yeah,
it's not an easy breezy process. It's interesting, and really anyone's at risk. And the problem is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, John, or chime in on this, but it's not a high priority thing for the FBI, which is who would handle this. Is that right?
Well, it's becoming a higher priority. What you see is the IRS actually has their own police force. It's called, and I'm sure Darrin knows about this, it's called Criminal Investigation Division. They're usually not people that you want calling you on the phone or knocking on your door because it usually means very bad things.
But, are those the ones with the guns and the gold badges, Darrin, that we talk about?
Exactly.
Yeah, those are the ones.
Exactly right. But they are intimately involved now in detecting and prosecuting and investigating identity theft, and they actually have I don't know if it would be an official term, task force, but they actually do coordinate with the rest of the Treasury agencies, Secret Service and those folks, and also the FBI whenever there's all this is criminal action. So they coordinate fairly well, and I think each of them, for example, if you report the scam about where CEOs are getting false emails that look like they come from their CFOs and they ask for W-2 data, or they ask, send me all the W-2s, I'm out of town, and that's an email scam that was fairly prevalent the last couple of years, and a lot of companies fell subject to it.
We see that on the real estate side as well. As a matter of fact, like I don't know any brokerage now in the state of Florida that doesn't require a seller or a buyer to sign basically a wire fraud scam disclosure. And it happened on one of my files. I represented the seller. The buyer's agent was actually new, but surprisingly they caught it. And they literally changed, like, my website, for example, is TampaHomeTalk.com. So they would go register the domain with an S, so TampaHomeTalks.com, and they would send out, oh, sorry, the wiring instructions have changed, send it here, so people will reroute their funds to another place. So
I haven't heard of that, but that makes perfect sense. It goes right along with, the sophistication of a lot of these criminals, that they track individuals that may have access to that data, and they have ways of fooling them into providing it to them. Even
John, hold that thought. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. When we come back, we're going to continue on that thought and a few more. Back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. And if you're just chiming in for this show, we have Mr. John Sapp. He's our special guest today with 1040.com. And in the earlier segment, we were talking all about ID theft and how it's become a very hot topic. The feds are getting more involved and that sort of stuff. And I'm sorry we had to cut you off, John. And please finish your thought. And maybe you can chime in on why we're hearing so much about ID theft, which is, I'm sure, why they're now getting involved.
That's exactly right. It's the sheer dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. I think, through September this year, the IRS estimates they've stopped over $4 billion in fraudulent refunds. They've stopped to that much. Of course, the number that actually may have went out is harder to identify, but it's just the sheer dollars of it. I think the IRS stopped 1.2 million confirmed ID theft returns last year. So they're getting better at it, and actually the number of reported first-time affidavits that were filed that there was an ID theft was cut in half last year. So we say that with trepidation, because it's constantly evolving, but at least there are things being done to make it a little bit better.
John, I'm curious, do they usually receive the money like via wire transfer into a bank account, or are they getting a check? Like, how do they normally get it?
Well, most folks will have a direct deposit made into an account somewhere that they've set up in some type of fraudulent account. Of course, there's a lot more what's called know your customer rules in the financial industry now that require them to verify the identity. Used to be years ago, and there's some misconception about this now, that you could get an anonymous prepaid card and put it on a prepaid card. But the same rules apply to the prepaid card accounts that actually apply to a regular bank account now. So the prepaid cards aren't really indicative of fraud the way they used to be. I think even in Miami, you may have seen the story several years ago where they pulled over a guy and he had a trunk full of prepaid cards that they had loaded up with tax refunds.
Darrin has shared that story a couple of times on the air.
Actually, there was a story in Tampa where I have a good friend who's an auto theft detective with TPD, and this chromed car caught their attention, and the car was literally chromed. That's an expensive kind of thing. It's very flashy. And this particular suspect, they couldn't figure out, they were conducting surveillance or trying to figure out if he was a drug dealer, what the deal was, and they couldn't catch him with anything because he wasn't dealing drugs. So they eventually pull him over, probably a pretext stop, but anyway, they pull him over, and the car's full of, tax refund checks and prepaid cards and all that stuff. And the funny thing about the story is then TPD calls the IRS to say, hey, this is a bad guy. You guys need to do something about this. And the IRS is like, well, we can't talk to you because of taxpayer confidentiality rules. I mean, it makes no sense.
And that's changing now, right? But in the world, it is on everyone's radar at the IRS, and now their willingness to, they're precluded from sharing information, right? Unless there's a valid purpose for them sharing information.
So what I want to know is how they're cashing the checks. Like, do they have a fake ID to go along with that check?
Sure. They fake IDs are available, and I think I mentioned the dark web earlier. And if you ever, I wouldn't suggest any of your listeners ever go on the dark web. I don't think there's any good reason to do that, but that dark web is like a yard sale for thieves.
I mean, in some cases, you could be prosecuted just for visiting a particular website on the dark web.
So I'm going to be dumb and ask what the dark web is.
Well, it is. If you think about the internet, I think it's a very small percentage of the internet is Googleable, right? Something you can actually show up on Google and visit the website. That's less than 20% of the entire internet is that, and then a chunk of it is private networks like your bank account, access to your bank. But then there's another section of it that's not available through your normal web browsers. It takes a special web browser to do it, and it makes the person accessing those websites anonymous. And so they can post identities for sale. They can post a lot of drugs.
So these
on there.
They're underground sites. You'd have to have the web address to go there in a different browser. It's not anything you would find or stumble on by accident.
That's correct. It would take a special browser that you have specifically, with intent, attempted to access the dark web, and those that go there are doing it specifically so that they can remain anonymous.
So listen, folks, don't get that special browser.
Yeah.
Don't start trying to figure that out. Just stay away.
I'm just like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this existed. I swear I learn something every day on this show.
We have seen, for example, out on the dark web, individuals' Social Security number, dates of birth, address, they'll be for sale $1 a piece.
I had an ID theft event happen about 10 years ago, actually, and it was before they'd really kind of figured out how to get the IRS to issue the big tax refunds and whatnot. And somebody ordered about $8,000 worth of computers and sent them to the Bronx, some vacant apartment in the Bronx. And it was really irritating because I had to devote several hours, 10 or 20 hours to trying to work this out. And I ended up
I've never even been there.
I still have never been to the Bronx, but I called, the city law enforcement, county law enforcement, the Secret Service, the FBI, you name it, and everybody just kind of shrugged and said, "There's nothing we can do
that
about
way."
this.
Like everyone's pointing to a different direction.
And especially the federal agencies were really, really nice and kind and, listened. But at that time, at least, there wasn't a whole lot of ideas about what to do about it. So it's kind of exciting to hear that they're at least trying to do something.
So what's changing exactly, and when is that supposed to take effect? Do you know?
As far as information sharing?
Well, just them being involved in the process to avoid and eliminate a lot of these people that are selling stuff on the black market and, filing these fake tax returns.
Well, of course, criminal investigation is constantly perusing the dark web and trying to identify folks. They have lots of tools that have helped them in their investigations. But probably the biggest thing going on there is there's a collaboration now. As of 2 years ago, our current IRS commissioner, who, by the way, I'm a big fan of. I think he's doing a great job. One of the smartest guys I've ever met. He has pulled together all of the tax software industry, so your Intuits of the world who writes TurboTax, and your H&R Blocks of the world, and your Drake Softwares of the world, who we, of course, 1040.com is our consumer-facing website. We all meet on a regular basis. We have calls every week, and we talk about different schemes that we're all seeing, and we collaborate and figure out ways to help stop that. And you'll see that, as your listeners prepare their taxes this year, they'll see every year it'll evolve, but they'll see additional security this year. For example, some of your taxpayers, if they do prepare their own tax return, for example, if they use 1040.com, they may be asked this year, instead of just getting their normal e-file PIN, they may be asked to provide their adjusted gross income from the previous year in order to file their tax return.
Well, I love that you're involved in the process. That's fantastic that you're actually collectively doing something about this every week and regularly. Is there anything that would help someone, like any flags that would trigger something to a person that their identity has been compromised?
Well, there's a couple things, and some of them may seem obvious, but it's not as obvious as you might think. If, for example, if they were to get a notice from the IRS, saying something looked odd on their tax return they filed, and they haven't filed their tax return yet, that is definitely something that they should, that would be a red flag. Probably the biggest flag is, and once again, this seems obvious, but when you file your tax return electronically and you receive a notice back that a return's already been filed. That is the number one flag.
That's it?
That's like a rut row.
Yeah.
And then it takes, I can tell you from personal experience, it can take months and months to clean that up and fix it and get the taxpayer their refund, which is kind of aggravating to them. But it just seems like it's part of
I'd be more concerned about my identity than the refund.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people that, really count on that refund. They're actually living on it in a manner of speaking. They want that money so they can, pay for living expenses.
That's exactly right. And that's another issue that taxpayers are dealing with this year is, as a result of the PATH Act, those that are receiving the Earned Income Tax Credit or the additional child tax credit, which is, the refundable portion of the child tax credit, those refunds are delayed. Normally, refunds are processed in, the IRS says less than 21 days. It's normally a couple weeks. Some folks, as quick as 10 days, they'll get their refund back, and they've kind of gotten used to that kind of cycle this year because of the PATH Act and the additional fraud filters going on the back end. Those refunds will be delayed. They won't be released until February 15th, but a lot of taxpayers won't see them until the end of February. So even if they file now, they won't get those refunds until the end of February, which will cause a lot of taxpayers that need that money some financial stress.
What is that PATH Act exactly? Is that something you can explain quickly, or you need to do that after the break?
Let's do it after the break.
Okay. So stick around so you can find out what that PATH Act is. We got a bunch more really good stuff coming up for you. We have John Sapp. He's our special guest today on the IRS Solution Attorney Shows with 1040.com. Darrin and I will be back in just a few minutes. Stick around. If you got a question for John, myself, or Darrin, you can call us at 888-404-1010. Again, program in the speed dial number here for Money Talk 1010, 888-404-1010. We'll be back in just a moment.
Are you suffering from IRS problems? Do you owe back taxes you can't pay? Is your paycheck or bank account being levied? Or maybe you haven't filed tax returns in years and simply don't know what to do. This is Darrin T. Mish to tell you that if you're tired of IRS problems hanging over your head and are ready for a fresh start, we may be able to help. Call the law offices of Darrin T. Mish at 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH. I can help you file old tax returns, work to release tax liens or stop wage levies, even negotiate deals to pay off back taxes at a discount, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. Hey, let's face it, these days it's not hard to get into tax trouble. A divorce, failed business, health problems, you name it. The point is, IRS problems may be solved if you're willing to take the first step. Call for a free consultation at 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474. Or go to the web at getirshelp.com, because the one sure thing is, IRS problems don't solve themselves. So get Mish. 888-438-6474. Principal Office, Tampa.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks for sticking with us through the break. And if you're just chiming into the show, we have John Sapp with us today. He's our special guest with 1040.com. And we're talking all about a lot of the craziness with tax fraud, IRS scams, just nutty stuff.
ID theft, how to protect yourself. So that kind of lends us to, well, actually, we asked at the end of the last segment, we had mentioned
the PATH Act. Is that what you said? Like PATH?
PATH, Protecting Americans Against Tax Hikes.
So whose idea was that? Just out of curiosity. Like anybody we should be giving kudos to?
Well, Congress, right? And so Congress passed a bill to make a lot of our, I don't know how aware folks are about, tax laws, but several years ago, for budgetary reasons and to try to assess the cost of particular tax initiatives, they started expiring tax law, so you would have a credit, but it would only be a credit for 3 years or something like that. So they made a lot of those credits permanent. There was the earned income credit and additional child tax credit. Some changes there were made permanent, which were very good things. And the other good thing about that particular piece of the legislation was the additional fraud filtering to give the IRS additional time to compare data that they might have received in W-2s and that kind of thing with the actual tax returns that were being filed. And because a lot of fraud revolves around those refundable credits, the additional child tax credit and the earned income credit, it gives them additional time to verify the information is accurate on the tax return before they release the refund. So I really want your listeners to understand that it's still to their advantage to file their tax returns early. That's one of the best things they can do to protect their tax process from being hijacked by a criminal, is to go ahead and file their tax return as quick as they can.
When is the soonest time they can file, since you mentioned that?
They can file today.
Okay, great. I thought they had to wait till the end of the month, no?
I think
it started as soon as they get their W-2, they can file. For most of your listeners, right? They'll receive a W-2 from their employer. As soon as they get that W-2, they should file their tax return as quick as they can, quick as they have all their information to do it accurately, so that if a fraudster were to have their information, they can't file a tax return before they did.
It's already been filed. Good advice.
So that's one of the things that you can do to protect your identity, your tax identity, is go ahead and file early, because then the IRS has more time to sort of examine the situation and see if potentially your, ID has been compromised.
What else? Like, let's say, you're listening to the show this morning, you're like, well, I never visit the black web or whatever they're talking about, and my stuff is pretty safe. Is there anything else that someone could, steps they could take to make sure that their identity is protected and they're not a victim to the tax file scheme?
Well, again, living in Florida, getting an IP PIN is not a bad idea. The other things they can do is just watch what they post on social media. You may want everyone to know that you drove a green car in high school. If that's one of your security questions to log into particular websites, they can hack that website because now they know you drove a green car in high school.
That is a fantastic example. I'm so glad you brought that up because that's not something that most people would think of. Is there anything else?
I so want to tell you about the car that I drove in high school. It was the biggest piece of junk, but now I can't even tell you the color of it or the year or anything. It was horrible. I spent more time working on that car than driving the car.
Brown Pinto.
No comment.
I might guess. You never know. So what else? Because that's a fantastic example, John, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. But is there anything else that you see that people are posting on their social feeds, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, that could sort of contribute to this sort of a tax identity fraud scheme?
Well, what is the thing we always think of, right? Mother's maiden name, or your mother-in-law's maiden name, or your maternal grandmother's first name. A lot of that we just post on social media, and it's out there for a lot of these technology-savvy criminals to just gather. They don't go out and actually browse those sites. They have computers and automated programs that go out and do that for them. So they'll find your name, they'll keyword it, and then they match it all up.
Or we're connected. How many of us connect our siblings or parents to our social profiles?
And Facebook so conveniently announces your birthday to everyone, so you probably shouldn't go on there and go, hey, I'm 42 today. Because now you just disclosed what your date of birth is, right?
And I'm a little paranoid about that, Darrin. I deleted my Facebook account last year just because I was getting so much information on how that was making my information public and how that information was being used. So I don't even have a Facebook account today. Now, my wife does, so she keeps me up to date on everything. So I'm not
well, you weren't missing anything over the last week or so. Let me tell you about that.
Trust me, be glad you were done on Facebook in the last week.
The other thing, that your folks should do is have good passwords. And Katrina, a lot of password experts now will say that the longer the password is, the better password it is for logging into, especially your tax software. If you're preparing taxes and you want, the minimal, you want an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, and, a special character. But also you should consider using passphrases, something you will remember, like I like to walk my dog, ! Or I like to walk my dog, Jack. So that would have uppercase, lowercase letters, something I could remember, but it's long enough to where a computer could not crack that. It would take it, a million years to crack that many letters.
That's a really good idea.
Some of the things they know, they'll mix, if you have like you said, I love to walk my dog, you might change the O to a 0. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but many people will do that. They'll mix the letter with a number. That way it's not a real word. And for me, mother's maiden name, anytime anybody asks me that, it's not really my mother's maiden name.
Oh, interesting.
Same thing for my husband.
It's
different.
You just put Boulder Dash in there or something.
Yeah,
crazy.
it's a totally different word, and it is not either one of our mother's maiden names.
Nice, that's smart.
That is another very smart thing to do is not give real answers to your security questions.
I'm so glad that I'm already a step ahead on that. I didn't even know it.
So my takeaway from this is that the password should not be password.
Or your dog's name, yeah.
Or admin.
Or yeah, exactly. Or 1 2 3 4.
So what's the step, like, let's say someone has experienced this already, what do they have to go through? Because it's a pretty extensive process, from what I understand, of what they have to go through to actually prove they are the person they say they are and not the person that hacked their return.
Right, and it's not quite as easy this year as it was last year. The IRS had a website last year that you could go through and verify your identity. This year, the taxpayer has to call the IRS, and they have set up a special 800 line for that, the identity verification service, and they'll ask them a series of questions. Usually they would want to have their prior year tax return with them whenever they call that number, because you don't want to be on hold for, I think the average hold published last year was 20 minutes, but we had reports, of an hour or so on hold.
Is that why you're shaking your head, Darrin?
Yeah,
that little
I can tell
eyeball?
you, depending on the time of day, it could be 5 minutes or it could be an hour and a half. So it just depends.
Time of day, time of year.
Yep.
We didn't see as many what the IRS called courtesy disconnects last year, where, it's kind of like when you would go to a restaurant and they say, well, it's going to be an hour wait, and then after an hour they come out and say, you've waited long enough, why don't you go home?
And they hang up on you?
Yeah, so they didn't do as many of that last year. They've done better this past year. But there's an 800 number. I actually have it here in front of me if you'd like me to go ahead and give that out.
Sure.
In case one of your listeners would need it. But it's 800-830-5084.
And we'll post that as well on the IRS Solution Attorney page, because I know sometimes people are in the car listening to radio and that sort of stuff. We'll post it. But you said 800-830-5084. Is that correct?
Sure, and I'm happy to send you a link to the website from the IRS if you'd like to do that.
That'd be great. So only a federal bureaucracy could come up with the term courtesy disconnect. I mean, It's like crazy. It reminds me of several years ago when they stopped taking walk-ins to the IRS assistance centers, because the press release really said, in order to provide better customer service, we're no longer going to provide customer service in person. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. But that's how they decided to do it. And I guess it could make sense budget-wise, where if you have people picking up the phone in a lower-cost area of the country or whatnot. But
well, the IRS, it's a little counterintuitive, right, because most of us see whenever Congress decides to cut the budget at the IRS or maintain the budget at the IRS, most of us think that's probably a good thing, right? We've got overspending in government or whatever, but actually, the IRS budget is one where for every dollar they put in, they get more than that back in revenue. So it's kind of counterintuitive. We see a lot of customer service problems because of the budget challenges at the IRS.
I agree. The figure that I've heard is actually $40 for every dollar spent. I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but it's a big number. And it does make sense. If you give more money to the people collecting the money, they're going to collect more money. This sort of makes sense.
It sure does. It sure does.
It's interesting. We were talking too about like proving your identity and asking some of those questions. And if you've ever gone online to dispute anything on your credit report, for example, some of those things they ask, like I don't even know them off the top of my head. I have to literally look at a copy of my own credit bureau to answer it.
Yeah, sometimes they'll say, "What color was the car that you owned in 2001?" You're like, but at least they give you the multiple choice, right?
Well,
so at least you can kind of guess.
They'll ask about your balance or your payment or who you had a loan with or something like that.
Okay. So
the other thing a victim of identity theft should always do, speaking of credit reporting agencies, is they should report that and at least put that 90-day hold on their credit accounts at Equifax and Experian and TransUnion. Actually, if you do it at just one of them, they go ahead and report it to the other credit agencies and will freeze your they'll put a fraud hold on your account for 90 days. You can do it permanently, and you can do that for free. At least that protects that piece. You can file a complaint at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. You can file a complaint at their website and let them know what's going on. And then you always want to contact your bank if you do have that happen.
Having a lock on your credit's not a bad thing either at all.
No, I have one. I have one as well. I use one of those services because I had the problem with the computers being sent to the Bronx. I use one of those services, and literally any time any inquiry is made on my account, I get a text immediately, and it really did. It stopped everything in its tracks. So it's unfortunate that I have to pay whatever it is, $30, $40 a month. And I know what you're saying, John, is that I don't even have to pay for that. But for me, it just gives me that peace of mind. I won't have to go back through that and fix it all again.
Well, and one of the nice things those services do, and there's some good ones out there and some bad ones, right? Just like Darrin, in your business, there's good folks out there with the IRS resolution, and there's bad.
Yeah, that's true.
But
there's good realtors and there's horrible realtors. Well, John,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you hear the music, but we have to take a real quick break. And when we come back after the break, Darren's going to hop in and ask you a couple more questions. And we're going to tell our listeners how to reach you and how to get more information. Be back in just a minute.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney,
Mr. Darrin Mish.
Mr. Darrin Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. I'm throwing him off a little bit here.
We're so glad to have John Sapp, our guest today from 1040.com. He's been doing a great job providing lots of value in terms of how to avoid ID theft and what to do if you've had an ID theft problem with regards to the IRS.
Today's show was amazing. And if you missed the show, pick it up in its entirety on the podcast.
You can pick it up on the podcast at the Apple Store and the Android Store, as well as our app on both stores as well.
And it's under the IRS Solution Attorney. And we'll post the show on the Facebook page, too.
Yeah, for sure. And also you can pick it up at getirshelp.com, or at least you can find your way there from there. John, I have one last question. Is there anything a taxpayer can do to speed up their refund if they have one of those two tax credits that we refer to, the EITC or the ACTC?
What are those tax credits?
The additional child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, mainly for mid to lower income individuals. It's a refundable. It's an anti-poverty measure from the IRS. It contributes a lot to larger refunds for lower income individuals. Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing they can do, of course, is ensure they electronically file their return and utilize direct deposit for that refund. You know, a paper check can take weeks to get, so there's no reason to do that anymore. Most folks will have access to some type of electronic account. And, of course, can I give just a gratuitous plug for our website?
Absolutely.
So 1040.com, of course, can prepare all individual return. Well, most individuals' returns. It uses the same calculation engine for taxes that our professional software uses. So we give an accuracy guarantee, fastest refund possible guarantee, the maximum refund guarantee, and they can actually, if they're qualified for a 1040 EZ, they can file that for free. So there's no cost to it, especially for folks in Florida that don't have to worry about state tax returns.
It's a beautiful thing.
The other thing that we do, it's just kind of one of our core values is to support socially responsible type initiatives. And one of those things is we give $2 for every tax return that's done, even free tax returns. We'll give $2 to an organization called Healing Water International. And last year, actually, we gave enough funds through that program to provide clean water in third world countries to over 14,000 people.
Wow, that's really impressive.
That's awesome.
My charity of choice is, to help solve world hunger, so I can really relate to that. That's really nice. I like to hear things like that. Well, you guys have a really great website, in particular your blog. What posts can we expect to see on the blog in the near future?
Well, we're going to do some on the PATH Act, so that'll be very quickly coming. Mistakes to avoid when filing your tax returns. What are the different ACA forms you can expect, and then confused tax terms. We'll have kind of a glossary out there that'll explain, credit, what is a credit, what's a deduction, and those kinds of things. And then other just helpful posts like how to pick your filing status and claiming dependents and itemizing deductions and those kinds of things. So we'll keep that blog gets updated very regularly so they can keep checking back for additional tax tips.
One more question for you, John, really quick, because I know we were talking about instead of getting a taxes, doing the automatic deposit with the sort of the rapid refund. Is there any type of risk, or how great is the risk, should I say, when you put that account number to do the auto deposit into your bank account?
Well, that's a good question, and you have to think of it in terms. Back in the day, I've been doing this a very long time. When we first started electronic filing, that was a big concern for folks because they weren't used to doing business over the internet. But it is encrypted, and all of those transmissions are secure between processing centers like 1040.com and the IRS. All of that transmission is all from secure websites, which encrypt that data as it goes in.
And John, don't be startled. That was our train that comes in about this time every week.
That was our producer, Pat, just giving you a hard time. John, you've been a fantastic guest. I want you to know that we really appreciate it. We really appreciate the fact that you dedicated this much time, to be on the show. And it's
Great
about
stuff. Good
yeah,
topics.
for sure. But right now,
Anytime. I had a great time. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care. At this point, it's time for the IRS Train Wreck of the Week. This is the segment of the show where I tell the story about somebody who came in and they were literally a train wreck. And after they got involved, or we got involved in the case, they usually end up smelling like a rose. Now, this is an interesting case, as most are, right? But I really love truck drivers. And I think that truck drivers are heroes in a lot of respects. I mean, they work really long hours. They sleep in the cab a lot.
You're lucky to get a shower.
Yeah, truck stops are not really super nice places. And if you think about it, just about everything that we use on a daily basis is brought to you by a truck or a truck driver. There's some things that are brought by rail, but most things are handled by trucks anymore. I mean, this laptop I'm sitting in front of, this microphone that I'm talking on, were brought here by a truck driver. And this particular gentleman was a truck driver, and he was an independent owner-operator for a few years, and he ended up owing the IRS a significant amount of money. It was $118,570. And it was just for 3 years. And what happened is these were some of the years where fuel was the most expensive. And so he ended up racking up this tax debt. And then after those 3 years, he ended up getting current with the IRS, meaning he got the message. He started working or filing his returns on time and didn't have any more problems. Well, he came to me after he had filed an offer in compromise, and this thing was a mess. It was actually in the rejection stage, and the IRS had come back and indicated to him that they thought that he could afford to full pay. So we took a look at it, and we visited and discussed some strategic, things that we could do, and we let that offer go because it was beyond saving. It just couldn't be saved. But then we employed some strategic, measures about how to spend his money a little bit differently, and we filed another offer in compromise. And I'm pleased to announce that just the other day it was accepted at $23,693. So he owed about $118,000, and he settled for about $23,693. So he's really happy. He gets to have his life back. He's not a bad guy. He's not a guy that didn't pay his taxes intentionally. He just got himself in a mess, and now he's going to pay his way out, and he's going to be able to go on with his life. He's newly married, and he and his wife are looking forward to their financial future.
How long does he have to pay that? Because $23,000 is still a pretty good amount of change.
Yeah, he has 5 months to pay that after the offer is accepted. So yeah, he's going to really have to hustle, but he's a can-do kind of guy, and he's the kind of guy that's going to make it happen.
I love that.
Yeah, I do too.
Great story. Because they're not always, settling for $1,000 or $2,000.
No, they don't always settle for little, tiny amounts of money. And sometimes you just have to do what you got to do as a person. You just have to make things happen. And he's very much like that. And so it was a pleasure working with him for sure.
They're definitely a special breed, and it's hard to, I can't even imagine having a tax problem that big, but I'm glad I know you.
And that's on the low end of things, right?
Definitely. Thanks for listening to the show this week. If you want to catch up with John Sapp, he's over at 1040.com, just like the tax return. And Darrin's at getirshelp.com.
As well as the podcast and the app at the Apple and Android stores. Our phone number at the office is 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474. 888-438-6474.
And we love that. Hope we got some value out of today's show. And if you have a suggestion or an idea or a topic for the show, we would love to hear from you. Got to meet a couple of our listeners last week at the Vision Board Workshop. It was amazing. I love hearing from you guys. Thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be here tomorrow at 9 a.m. for Tampa Home Talk.
And for today,
this week,
we're out.